Welcome back to DNL. Time for our editorial page. We are now joined by SNY's NFL insider Ralph Vacchiano as well. Yesterday, former Jet All-Pro Mark Gastineau revealed that he's suffering from dementia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. Gastineau, of course, was part of the New York Sack Exchange back in the 80s, and he once held the record for sacks in a single season. Now, Gastineau believes his illnesses can be traced back to his 10-year NFL career, and he's working with USA Football and Heads Up Football to increase safety at the youth level. Ralph, what impact are stories such as Gastineau's after football having on the sport of football?
Well, I think over the last few years, you've seen, obviously, there's a lot more awareness of the damage that football can cause. And in Gastineau's case, he was also a professional boxer for a few years, so that probably added to it. But the more people hear these stories and see the damage that football does, the more they're starting to question the participation on a youth level. You're seeing a lot of even former pro football players say, I don't want my kids playing this sport, or we want to find safer ways to play this sport, which is something that Mark Gastineau, during his interview, talked about. So there is a big impact because it's something that when I was growing up, you never saw or heard these stories of what happened to football players after their careers.
This is not a new story, unfortunately, for former football players. Do you think that it has lasting impact, or does America sort of move on story after story?
I think it has some lasting impact, especially when you have kids and you're thinking about letting them play football. You know, I'm wondering what the league is obviously doing things about this. They're marketing commercials with tackling dummies that move automatically so you don't get the impact of going off to another player. You know, every time you watch a game, they talk about the concussion protocols and have the doctors on camera so you can see what they're doing. So I think they're trying to, you know, get past that or spin it or show there's some safety, but I don't think it's going to have a major impact.
There's nothing. First of all, obviously, the NFL was very slow to recognize this, and now that they are recognizing it, there's some legitimate, I'm sure, desire to address it. There's probably some eyewash in there too. This Heads Up program is what it's called. There's a study that was released just 5 months ago that it's had a very minimal impact on reducing concussions and head injuries, and I think that's because the nature of football, no matter what the commissioner, the commissioner's office, or any program tries to do, is to hit large people, hit each other really hard. So you can say, like, don't go the direct head-to-head hits, but the fact is, when people like us look and say, okay, would I let my kid, would I want my nephew to play, would I want someone I care about to play, whatever it may be, and you think that the answer is no, that's a new generational thing, and I think it's going to take 10, 20, 30 years for us to really see the impact that's...
Right, but I don't think there's any question that the future of the sport is in danger. Sure. I mean, it's not safe to play football. Not to mention, by the way, you talk about all the contact and the head-to-head hits and all that. What about the stuff that they're putting in their bodies to be able to go out there? I mean, you just saw Gastineau. Who knows what he was doing? And you don't think, we talk about PEDs with baseball players, you don't think that today's NFL guys are using PEDs? Please. So all those different things add up to, in my opinion, what is going to be a shaky future. Now, not 5 years, certainly, maybe not even 10, but 20 years down the road, I mean, I would never even want to think about letting my children or nephews or anybody like that play football.
I think that, to that point, Sal, I think that you could say that football right now is like boxing in, I don't know, 1920, 1930, where it was one of the most popular sports in America. It was hard to question how it was ever going to be not popular, but you look 50, 60, 70 years down the line and it eventually becomes a marginalized thing.
Ralph, how would you put into context what this story means for the Jet fan who grew up with Mark Gastineau? I mean, certainly he wasn't Joe Klecko, who was more popular, but this was when the Jets were at their peak, and he was sort of the polarizing figure.
He was. I mean, look, the Jets don't have a championship history, but they had some very good years back then, and he was sort of an icon for fans of the Jets in the 80s. Certainly in my era, he was the guy that you looked to.
Sack dancer.
Yeah, the whole New York, people still remember the nickname, the New York Sack Exchange. So when you hear this, if you grew up in that area, it's sad to hear. I mean, you may know it on some level that this happens to football players, but when you see a big, strong, young guy like that suddenly become this old guy with dementia and Alzheimer's, it hurts.
And one thing Sal brought up that I wanted to address is this. You know, I'm not so sure it's going to wear out because even in 20 years, for a couple of reasons. There's an appetite in this country for violence, number one. And number two, gambling is so huge. Gamblers aren't going away from the league.
But again, earlier this week, we heard Bo Jackson say, you know, maybe he wouldn't play or maybe he'd cut his short earlier. We'll see if this makes an impact with the current NFL players if they start to walk away from the game earlier than the ones did in the past.